Welcome to today's webinar on the basics of writing and publishing your family history. My name is Ginevra Morse, the online education coordinator at the New England Historic Genealogical Society. I'll be moderating today's event. You're here today because you're ready to share your family story with a wider audience, be it family, the genealogical community, or future generations. No matter where you are in the process, this webinar will certainly inspire and inform your next steps. Giving today's presentation will be Penny Stratton, Publishing Director of NEHGS. She's been at the Society for 8 years and oversees all print publications, including our magazine, scholarly journal, and books. She's also managed all steps of book production for more than a dozen NEHGS and Newbury Street Press titles. Penny will go over the 10 basic steps for writing and publishing your family history, and she'll also list some go-to resources that are sure to help you along the way. At any time during the presentation, please feel free to write a question in the panel to the right of your screen. Penny will answer as many of those as she can in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the hour. And just as a reminder, this event is being recorded and the video will be posted to our website in the next couple of days. So we have a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Take it away, Penny.
Thank you, Ginevra, and welcome everyone to today's presentation. At NEHGS, we encourage people to record their family histories in writing. NEHGS has a long tradition of publishing, dating from 1847, when we first published our quarterly journal, the New England Historical and Genealogical Register, the flagship journal of American genealogy. It was in that journal back in 1870 that we introduced a standardized way to present genealogical information, known as register style, which I'll discuss in a little bit. We also published the quarterly magazine American Ancestors, geared toward family historians of all levels. Finally, we have a very active book publishing program, publishing 15 to 20 titles per year, how-to books and books of records, and also compiled genealogies of American families, which we publish under our Newbury Street Press imprint. You've probably relied on various written genealogies in your research. There's nothing like poring over a family history book, reading about the people in your family and looking at photos of people and places. Let's do a quick survey. Who attending today has consulted a 50 or 100-year-old book in researching your family? You'll see a survey on your screen. Feel free to answer, and we'll share the results in just a few moments. Might be old books you've consulted in a library or other repository, or books that have been passed down in your family. Or you might have looked at digitized books at archive.org, Google Books, or some other internet site. But remember that those books started their lives as printed and bound on paper. Wow, it looks like 90% of you have used these old materials in your research, and I'm actually not surprised. Think of how happy you are that each of the authors of those books wrote things down for you to consult. We want you to commit to being that person. After all, probably no one right now knows your family like you do. And because you know that family story so well, we urge you to make sure it's still around in decades to come. Write it down certainly, but make sure it gets into print. You can take your writings to a local copy shop or work with a book printer or publisher or even an online service. Fortunately for us living in the 21st century, digital printing technology has made book printing relatively easy and inexpensive. As I talk about writing and publishing your family history, I'm going to make the assumption that you'll be writing a book. However, you could just as easily be sharing a part of your story in a journal or magazine article or some other format. Although I'm referring to books, many of the steps I'm about to cover are just the same, and you will find them applicable to shorter publications. So, let's move on to look at the 10 steps involved in sharing your family history in print. Each step could almost be its own course, but in this webinar we'll be going over just the basics. Step number 1, shift mental gears. This first step might seem obvious, but it's so important it really needs to be emphasized. You need to shift mental gears and stop thinking about your family history as a research project. You need to begin thinking about it as a publication, something that will have a beginning, a middle, and an end. All through your research, you've been making conscious or unconscious choices about your goals. My colleagues and I often make the analogy that we're acting like a camera lens, focusing in on detail and then using a wide-angle lens to get the big picture. Now's the time to step back, zoom out, and make another choice: how to turn some of your disparate elements, notes, photos, and documents into something else. Step 2. Consider your audience and time frame. You might be thinking in general about the audience of the future, which would be great, but you might have some more immediate considerations. Do you have an elderly relative who would enjoy reading about a particular aspect of your family history? Do you want to have something to present to your grandchildren? Have you solved a particular genealogical puzzle and know that other genealogists will benefit from your research? At the same time, consider the time frame you have. Perhaps you're in no particular rush to complete a family history, or perhaps there's a significant event to use as a deadline. Now, if it's a family reunion this summer, I'm already a little worried about your schedule, but maybe you could produce a photo book in time for that and follow with the family history in another year. In short, considering your audience and then looking at a calendar will help you plan what's manageable for you. Step 3. Choose a genealogical format. There are a number of models and formats to follow: a biographical dictionary, a memoir, a photo album with extensive captions. But when writing about your ancestry, there are 2 standard formats: the descendancy format, also known as register style, which begins in the past and moves forward in time, and the ancestor table, or Ahnentafel, which starts at or near the present and moves back in time. Let's take a look at these 2 formats. The first, the descendancy format, is also called register style because it was developed by NEHGS in 1870 for the New England Historical and Genealogical Register. It has proved to be a useful and highly efficient way to organize and present genealogical information in writing. In this format, you begin in the past, often but not always, with the immigrant to America, and move toward or to the present, tracing some or all of the descendants of one person. The backbone of this system is the family group, with key people given identification numbers and with the inclusion of as much vital data as possible for each person. Although you can trace all the descendants of one common ancestor, you can also trace multiple lines in this way. Because you're coming down from a common ancestor, you treat all children of that ancestor and all the children's offspring. Lots of aunts and uncles and cousins. Let's look at an example. Here's a basic family group. Think of it as a story with a beginning, a middle, and an end. We start with a person who has an identification number, Henry Morgan, and we include information for that person and his or her spouse: full names, vital statistics, places, and dates. At the end of the sketch, we present children with full names, vital statistics, and identification numbers for any child who will later be treated in full, typically a child who later has offspring. These numbers continue consecutively throughout the treatment of the family. Note that Benjamin Franklin Morgan, Roman numeral 4, is not assigned an Arabic number. He died young before having children, and so he will not be covered in his own family group later. Finally, you include other information known about the person. You might not know anything, or you might know quite a bit, perhaps pages worth. We'll talk about adding narrative a little bit later. Now let's look a bit more at the second standard writing format I mentioned, the TOEFL or Ancestor table. Unlike register style, the TOEFL goes backward in time, going from present to past. Usually it includes every known person in a direct line. The TOEFL has a very precise numbering system also. As with register style, in an TOEFL you present the basic data about people, but the people are arranged in a different order. It's as if you were to take a multi-generational chart and turn it sideways. In an TOEFL, the subject, let's say it's you, is number 1. Your father is number 2, and your mother is number 3. Your paternal grandparents are numbers 4 and 5. Sorry, your paternal grandparents are numbers 4 and 5, and your maternal grandparents are numbers 6 and 7, and so on, going back in time until the numbers get into the thousands. In every father-mother pair, you'll note the father has an even number and the mother an odd number. In an TOEFL, you can find the line of descent mathematically. You double the person's number to get the father's number. The mother's number is the father's number plus 1. Conversely, to find a person's child, you divide the father's number by 2. And here's what an ancestor table looks like in writing. The subject, in this case Janice Elaine Morgan, is number 1. Her parents are numbers 2 and 3, and so on. The TOEFL is a great format for listing all your ancestors, but the fact that family groups are not held together can make it difficult for a non-genealogist to follow. So again, consider your main audience. Will they be able to follow this format? Here's a tip. Look at other publications. Look at journal articles, magazine articles, books. There may not be one ideal model, but you should be able to find something that inspires you in terms of its scope, level of detail, presentation, or design. Step 4. Define your scope and make a table of contents. Do you want to write about descent from one particular ancestor, or do you want to try to touch on every single person in your family tree, or do you want to list only all direct ancestors? Again, consider your audience and your time frame. Your writing project may become unwieldy if you try to include too much. And as we all learned in school, making an outline is an essential first start to writing. This is what your table of contents will do for you. Try drafting a few tables of contents and see what transpires. You'll already have made some decisions about scope, but now is the time to start sketching out the actual outline for your work. Your table of contents might be as simple as this one. In this example from a genealogy of the Lowell family, there's a chapter on the family in England, then chapters on specific generations. It may seem overly simplistic to say first generation, second generation, third generation, and so on, but it does give us a template to work within, to cover the family prior to immigration to America, and then a certain number of generations in America. In fact, this book on the Lowell family covers 14 generations, bringing the family history all the way to the present time. And now in a second table of contents, we see that the author plans to follow 5 different families. In fact, this is a case where we have 5 parallel sections, each in register style, each traced from a common ancestor. And the appendix covers results of DNA testing. Appendixes are great places to tuck things that are of interest but don't necessarily fit in the main part of the book. So your table of contents is a benchmark to return to as you write. Will it absolutely match what you end up with? Maybe not. You might determine that you've bit off more than you can chew. Or when you begin to write, you may find that there's a different angle of your story that wants to be told. Listen to those instincts and revise your table of contents as necessary. Step 5. Create a style sheet for genealogical elements and citations. As we'll see shortly, there are many conventions that have been developed for the presentation of genealogical information. In addition, you may be encountering variant or unusual spellings in your research notes. Before you begin writing, think about what kinds of decisions you'll have to make relating to capitalization, spelling, abbreviations, punctuation, and the like. It's important to be consistent in your presentation. When a work isn't consistent, the reader may start to wonder whether the author's research is similarly slipshod. Your style sheet should cover certain aspects of genealogical style. For example, how will you abbreviate the word baptized? As well as other style points, such as whether you'll spell out numbers or use numerals, whether you'll use accent marks in foreign names, and the like. In addition, record how you plan to cite census data, material obtained from internet sources, unlabeled clippings found in family papers, and so on. And then you'll also want to make a list of key references and determine what short form to use. You can then print that list at the back of your book in the style of a bibliography. Say you're citing The Winthrop Fleet by Robert Charles Anderson, which was published by NEHGS in 2012. You would cite it in full the first time you put it in a note, but then make a mental note or written note to call it simply Anderson Winthrop Fleet, or simply Winthrop Fleet, or even just WF. Step 6. Well, so far it's been easy and you've done all that prep work, and now comes the scary part. You need to write. There's no two ways about it. You just have to start. Turn on your computer, open up your word processing program, put your fingers on the keys and begin. Person by person, family group by family group, or generation by generation. Let's take a very basic look at how to build a family sketch. By looking at model publications and familiarizing yourself with the different genealogical formats, you'll better understand the standards of writing. You may also want to include many of these conventions in your style sheet. Now, I'll mention a number of resources at the end of the presentation which will go into greater detail about the actual art of writing and how Microsoft Word and other programs can help make your life easier. Here's an example of a descendancy or register style sketch. There are a number of things to note here. First, in the first paragraph, the person number, a generational number. Elizabeth Cutts Lowell is in the 7th generation. Here's the lineage line. This shows the direct line of descent, starting with John Lowell, her father, and her grandfather also named John, generations 6 and 5, going all the way back to Percival, who was the immigrant and generation number 1. We give Elizabeth's birth first, followed by her death. These are the bookends of her life. And after that, we present information about her marriage. Note that we usually put the place first, followed by the date. It can be the reverse, but this is our preferred style at NEHGS. Now we want to give information about Warren Dutton, her husband, his birth, his death, again, place followed by date, and then to further define him, the names of his parents, including his mother's maiden name. Let's skip down to this listing of children. First, we have an introductory line giving the full names of the parents, including Elizabeth's generational number and her maiden name, the children numbered in order using lowercase Roman numerals, the generational number, which you only need to give for the first child, again, born and then died, place and then date, and note this abbreviated style. B for born, D for died, UNM is unmarried, M is married. And then an Arabic number for the child who will be carried forward. Additional information about the family group follows the basic data and precedes the children's listing in a new paragraph. As I mentioned before, you might have nothing really to add here, or you might have pages and pages. Now let's apply on and TOEFL style to this same couple. In an on and TOEFL, we tend to look at couples, a man and a woman who are in the direct line of descent. First the man with the even number, and then the woman with an odd number. In essence, you can think of this as a register-style sketch broken in two to focus equally on the man and the woman. Just like in register style, we list first birth, and then death, and then marriage. And we give the place, and then we give the date. There's no need to list marriage information for the woman because we've already seen it in the man's paragraph. And then additional information is usually given after the woman's entry. Now I'd like to step back here a moment and look at what happens if you have your information in a genealogy program such as Family Tree Maker or Roots Magic. If you do, it's a fairly easy matter to export what you have in a format that you can open in Microsoft Word for further analysis. This particular example is an export of material in descendancy style from Family Tree Maker, saved in rich text format and opened in Word. I could also have chosen to have exported it as an Ancestor table. This example shows that it's a fine first step in the writing process, but it's not enough. The exported material will reflect the data as you entered it, and you will need to review and revise accordingly. For example, in the first paragraph alone, look at how many times we're seeing that Cowneck is on Long Island in New York. Really, we get it after the first mention. There's no need to repeat Long Island, New York each time within a family group. And while we're at it, let's decide to spell out Long Island rather than abbreviate it sometimes. You're probably seeing many other things you would change here. But exporting the data will give you a good idea of what you've got for a manuscript and if what you have is manageable within your time frame. So certainly it's an option for beginning the writing process. Regardless of how you begin, by starting from scratch or starting with an export, you can begin shaping your work, returning to your TOC, that's table of contents, or outline, and checking your progress as you go. Remember to be clear, to be consistent, and to add citations. Cite as you write. This is a really important tip. A professional family history will have a citation for each statement of fact that is not common knowledge. Some of our genealogies have thousands of notes. Thus, one important tip is just not to put this off. Add them as you write. You'll save time and you won't need to make as many revisions later. Another important tip is not to let gaps in information stop you from writing. If there's still something you don't know about a person or a family, don't let that stop you from starting. Add a note in your draft to remind yourself to address that gap at a later point. And if you never obtain the information, simply say so, indicating that it's an area for future research. Step 7. Add narrative and photos. One concern we sometimes hear is that books of genealogy are just full of data and dry as dust. But they don't have to be. There's plenty of room for narrative within the 2 basic formats, and you want to include additional information. One of my colleagues, David Allen Lambert, talks about filling in the dash between the birth and death dates. What information can you provide about your ancestor? What can bring him or her to life? Your narrative can come from a variety of different sources, both published and unpublished. For instance, census data, ships registers or immigration records, wills and probate, obituaries, diaries, letters, interviews with family, all tell a story. If you don't have a specific story about your ancestor, consult historical sources to provide greater context. Once you've gathered some key resources, just start typing. In general, you'll want to enter information chronologically, and then perhaps later you'll want to revise it to emphasize some themes you've identified. Include only what's of interest. Consider omitting overly detailed information, and consider omitting information that the reader can easily find in other sources. For instance, if a relative fought in the American Revolution, you don't need to explain why the war began. Now, let's look at a few examples of how narrative can be presented in a publication. The first example is from a book titled The Keene and Sheehan Families of Bridgeport, Connecticut. It focuses on a small family who immigrated from Ireland in the late 1800s. The table of contents shows us that all of Part 1 talks about the family in Ireland. Part 2 covers the immigrant settlement in Connecticut. And there's also a chapter about the importance of education in the family. Those entire first 2 parts of the book are completely narrative. Part 3 of the book, we get to the genealogy, 5 generations worth. Appendix 1 covers the genealogy of an allied family, and then in the second appendix we have the transcript of a conversation among 5 living siblings. We'd intended to call the transcript for details to include in the genealogical coverage of their parents, but when we listened to the tape, the stories were so compelling and we got such a strong sense of the siblings' tight-knit relationship that we decided to include large excerpts from the transcript in the book. It's a great gift for the current generation to read, and I can only imagine how grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren will value those words. And we did, in fact, include some of the stories within the register-style family groups as well. And we have lots of photos in the book. The Keene book has 32 pages of color photos, both historic family photos and current photos. Questionnaires were sent to living family members, and living relatives were interviewed and invited to submit not only photos but also family stories. Because this is a relatively small family, that process was manageable. This book is a wonderful model for anyone thinking of doing a family history. Another example is a new book called The Ancestors and Descendants of George Rufus Brown and Alice Nelson Pratt. It's a register-style book with narrative and photos incorporated throughout. The table of contents here shows that the book has many chapters. Each of them is a separate register-style presentation, with each chapter beginning with person number 1 for that family. The next slide shows on the left page an excerpt from the sketch of one individual, Riney Brown. Look at how much detail there is about him within this sketch. Riney kept an extensive diary, and we've excerpted it in a boxed insert here within his sketch. And now we have some other pages to show from the Brown genealogy. This is the beginning of the Mather chapter, showing a little narrative introduction and an early image of the immigrant Richard Mather, which we found in an 1893 published book. And the boxed insert here focuses on some of the key ancestors in this line, 3 of them ministers. The examples from these 2 books show that there is ample room for narrative in a genealogical publication. Now, it's beyond the scope of this webinar to talk about page layout. If you work with a publisher, which we'll discuss in a few minutes, the publisher will handle that for you. You can also do it yourself using Word or another program. We cover this topic in our 2-day writing and publishing seminar in Boston. Step 8. Read, refine, repeat. You've got a draft, and now you need to read it and refine it. Self-editing is one of the most important things you can do. If you end up working with a publishing company or submitting a short piece to a journal, someone else will do editing for publication, but it's still important for you to check and revise what you've written before you submit your manuscript. For one thing, you'll want to check and cross-check your data. Does the information in the child list, for example, match the data in the parent sketch? Are the numbers consecutive? Are your source citations complete? Reread the manuscript with reference to your style sheet. I can't overemphasize the importance of the editorial process. And just to show you the kinds of things we catch as we edit, here's a scan of a page I had on my desk, noting some errors found in the manuscript. A mistake in numbering, a misspelling or 2, something funny with dates, a missing source. Now here's another important tip. Ask someone else to review your manuscript. It's so difficult to see your own mistakes because you're so close to the material. So ask someone else to review your work to get a fresh set of eyes on the case. If you work with a publisher, the publisher will provide that someone else, but you might want to enlist a fellow genealogist to read it before you even reach that point. Step 9, index. The most useful reference works have an index. In your family history, you'll want to have a comprehensive index that lists every name mentioned in the text and captions. Some family histories also include place names. Think about the reader of the book. What will he or she want to look up? Now I've got an example here from a genealogy of the Saltonstall family. Here you see some general page references for the family as a whole, and you see we've delineated just which Abigail is which by giving different generational numbers. Be sure to include married names of women. For instance, Adriana will be found not only under Saltonstall, but also under Jan Turco and under Cole in this index. Now, if you have a place name index, the main entry will be the state, or if it's another country, the name of the country would be the main entry. Sub-entries are city or town or county. You index the name on the page, and indicate, as here, if the place is now known by another name. You can do the index yourself or hire an indexer. A publisher will arrange this step for you if you don't want to index the book yourself. Finally, step 10, publish or print. Digital printing has made it easy and affordable to print your family history, as I said before. But what exactly is the difference between publishing and printing? Well, basically, a printer prints and a publisher provides additional services. A printer could be Kinko's, Staples, or a local copy shop, usually with limited binding options. A commercial printer who specializes in book production, or an online service such as Lightning Source. With a printer, you are responsible for all the work in preparing your manuscript and getting it to a print-ready PDF. As far as publishing goes, there are two types. The traditional brick-and-mortar publisher would take your manuscript and provide a number of services such as editing, design, production management, and marketing and distribution. A traditional publisher also offers royalties. Unfortunately, unless you're writing a tell-all memoir of a famous ancestor, traditional publishers probably won't be interested in producing your book. So we recommend using a second type of publisher, one that offers self-publishing services. These are pay-as-you-go, but offer a wide menu of services such as editing, help with images, design, layout, proofing, indexing, working with the printer, warehousing, and marketing and distribution. There are many such companies online, such as Lulu, iUniverse, and CreateSpace, as well as brick-and-mortar companies such as Otter Bay Books, Stories to Tell, and Small Batch Books, all of which specialize in memoir and family history. By the way, these are listed in the Writing and Publishing subject guide at our online learning center, and we'll provide the link in a minute. So when determining whether to work with a printer or online publisher, you need to ask yourself, what are you comfortable doing or managing yourself? How complicated is your book? How fancy a book do you want? What can you afford? Do you need help with distribution? So now let's review our 10 steps in writing and publishing your family history. Number 1, shift mental gears. 2, consider your audience and time frame. 3, choose a genealogical format. 4, define your scope and make a table of contents. 5, create a style sheet. 6, write. 7, add narrative and images. 8, read, refine, repeat. 9, index. 10, print or publish. Now, there are a number of resources that can assist you during the writing and publishing process. As I just mentioned, you can consult our Writing and Publishing subject guide, which is available at our online learning center. The subject guide covers much of what we discussed today, plus additional resources, templates, tips, and how-to videos. AmericanAncestors.org/writing-publishing. There are also some publications you might consider purchasing or perusing. We have 2 portable genealogists on the topic of writing, one on building a genealogical sketch and the second on genealogical numbering. Both go into greater detail and provide examples, including tips on using Word for automatically numbering register-style material. I'm also currently working on a new edition of our Writing and Publishing Guide, due out before the summer. This will include more in-depth coverage of what we've discussed today, as well as coverage of using Word for automatic numbering and index tagging. It will include a comprehensive guide to genealogical style, covering standard abbreviations used in genealogy, applicable capitalization rules, and how to handle special situations such as name changes and alternate spellings. All of these publications and more can be purchased at our online store. And coming up in May, we're holding an in-depth 2-day workshop on writing and publishing at our library and archives in Boston. We'll discuss best practices and helpful tips in order to turn your research into a publication. We'll talk about goal setting, using genealogical style while writing, working with images, adding narrative. Participants will learn about working with editors, publishers, and the nuts and bolts of completing family history publications. Participants will also receive one-on-one consultations with our writing and publishing experts. If interested, contact education@nehgs.org or register online. Finally, we'll be offering online courses in the near future for current NEHGS members on getting the most out of Word for your family history publication. And we also hope to conduct a more in-depth online seminar on writing and publishing. So stay tuned for those. You can see what we currently have planned at americanancestors.org/online-programs. Remember, no one knows your family's story the way you do. 100 years from now, we hope that your own descendants will find your book on a library shelf and thank you for telling the story. And maybe it will inspire one of them to be the keeper of the story and the teller of the continuing story of your family.
Thanks, Penny, for your presentation. So now let's get to your questions. If you have a question for Penny about anything that she's covered during this presentation, go ahead and write it in that panel to the right of your screen. I see that we already have a number of questions, so we'll start getting to them. So Penny, Mary Beth asks, she'd like to include as many documents as possible in her book so her readers don't have to re-look up the information or try and refine those documents. Do you have any comments or advice for her on that?
That's a very good question. I've seen that done in books. I'm a little concerned that it can be overwhelming to have them all mixed in with your genealogy that you're presenting. I applaud your interest in making them available to others. I wonder if you can select some key ones to include in your family history and consider possibly making the documents available in another format for people who might be interested. It's a good thing to think about, and maybe you want to check back with me in a little while and I'll have a more well-formed answer to that. But we really try to pick ones that are particularly noteworthy and sometimes particularly pretty because they look nice in a book. But if you have a complete citation for all your material, people should be able to find them. I realize that that might involve being a member of an organization, a paying member of an organization that provides it, but I would urge you to be judicious in choosing what you include in your family history.
Great. And Daniel asks, when does it become necessary to cite birth, death, and marriage information, or should those facts always include a citation?
The facts should always include a citation. Anything that's not common knowledge should have one. And there are a couple different ways you can approach this. In some particularly scholarly looking genealogies, you'll see a note number added directly after the actual fact. But what you can do is put a note number at the end of the sentence or even at the end of the paragraph and then group your citations into one particular note. It makes it a little less disruptive to the reader so they're not always seeing superscript numbers peppered in there when you already may be using generational numbers. So what you would need to be sure to do if you do any grouping of references is to indicate which reference is for which fact. So you might have, say, a birth certificate and then have parenthesis birth and maybe something else with parenthesis death and go on from there. but every single fact should have a citation.
And Laurie asks, what are the ethics of including living people in your work? Do you need to get their permission?
This is something that comes up a great deal, and I know it's of concern to a number of people. I think although, as we all know, there's very little privacy and a lot of information is readily available about people, and we don't know even anecdotally of any cases of identity theft arising from someone reading a genealogy. I think it's good to be sensitive to living people's wishes. So if it's information you've obtained from relatives, make sure they know it's going to be published. And most important, if they really hesitate, accede to their wishes. In a couple of the books we've published, we have included information about people, but in accordance with some people's requests, it's been limited, maybe to birth date and not much else.
Great. Laurie also asks, do you need a traditional publisher to get your book into a library, or will self-publishers help with that?
Self-publishers will help with that too. Absolutely, and you can actually do some of that yourself. If you've got a number of books, you may have used some libraries or repositories that were extremely helpful to you, and you may want to donate a copy to them, and they would be more than happy to receive it, I know, as would we.
Great. A few people have asked if there is a register-style template that they can use on our website or anywhere.
Yes, there is. I don't have the URL at the tip of my tongue, but I believe it's on the subject guide that we referred you to earlier. If you go to our website, we've given you the URL to the subject guide, but if you go to our website and go to Publications and then select Register, one of the choices that pops up on the left-hand menu on the Register page is something like Register Style and Submission. So it's there, you can download it. It's very, very helpful for helping you work in Microsoft Word.
Great. And if they go to the subject guide, they'll find a lot of both a template as well as an overview of this presentation, those 10 steps, links to all of those self-publishers that Penny mentioned, and also a few people have asked that we post a sample style sheet and some of those index entries that we provided, and that's something that we can certainly do as well.
Oh, absolutely, yes.
So just go to that subject guide and you'll find a whole lot of information, and that's also where we'll post the recording to this presentation. A few people have also asked about the number of books they should publish. Do you have any advice on that?
The number of books to publish?
Yes.
Well, there's no prescribed number, but I applaud you for thinking of doing more than one, and here's why. It can be very hard to cover lots and lots of families in one book. So we actually have a couple people that we know here who have published, taken a different slices of their family ancestry and done books on them. Descendants of the Benson family, descendants of the Reed family, descendants of the I can't think of some of the Wade family. Those are all ancestors of one person, just taken systematically. So that's one thing you can do. Or you can do like we did in the Brown book and do multiple families. One possibility is to look, say, at your grandparents and take their lines and focus on them. But I would say you're limited only by how much time you have and how ambitious you are.
Great. And as far as, I think, the quantity of, say, one title, do you have any suggestions as to how many copies of a book should be
Oh,
printed?
that's it. Not how many books to write, but how many to
Well,
print.
I think both,
I was
both
going off
questions.
in a different direction. I apologize. How many you can print? You can print one these days. I mean, that's what print on demand is all about. It's going to be a lot of expense going into just doing one book. But whereas before digital printing technology came about, sometimes there was a minimum of like 250 books that you could do with a commercial printer. That's not the case anymore. For some of our compiled genealogies, we do as few as 50. It depends on how many you think your family will want, whether you think the genealogical community is interested and might want to purchase it, and whether you, how many repositories you want to make donations to. But you don't even have to pick a round number. You can ask for something like 27. So there's no right or wrong. It all depends on what you think your audience is. So now you have two different answers to that question.
Thanks, Penny. Anne asks, in a story-style family history, are endnotes just as acceptable as footnotes?
Yes.
Okay.
Put simply, yes. It gives you a lot more leeway on the page to really tell the story. And if you do the level of citation that we urge you do for a genealogy, you could be talking about having a great part of every page taken up with footnotes. So in fact, for our Newbury Street Press books, we're moving more and more toward endnotes rather than footnotes. And I should also point out that you can put them at the end of the chapter or you can put them at the end of the book. We tend to put them at the end of the book just to keep all the text running together, but it's certainly acceptable to do it either way.
Thanks. A few people have asked about getting permission for images, maps, excerpts from books to include in their publication. What kind of advice do you have for them?
Okay. That's a very good question, and certainly thank you for thinking of that. Those of us who own copyrights applaud you. Anything that's published before 1923 does not need permission. And in general, any text published after that, the copyright laws are complicated, but the rule of thumb is if it's before 1923, you don't need permission. If it's after 1923, you probably do, but you have to consider fair use as well. And so if you're just taking a small amount of text from something, 50 or 100 words, you probably don't have to worry unless it accounts for more than 10% of the original publication. So that's text. For images, the same copyright applies. What I like to do is use now with Google Image Search and Bing Image Search, you can filter your search results to find things that are license-free. I haven't used it enough to know how reliable it is, but I think it's a really good start. And while I'm at it, I'll mention that you can also filter your search results for large images, which is good for finding things that are high resolution enough for printing in a book. So that's a good place to start. When you go to Wikimedia Commons, which is a good place to search for images, that's also pretty good too, and there's usually some statement of ownership. However, you have to be careful because sometimes people think, oh, so this Da Vinci painting is from the 1400s or whatever, so I can use that because it's old and it's public domain. Well, not really, because it's owned by a museum and you need the repository's permission to use it. So be careful with that kind of thing. If it's held by a museum or some other place, you need that institution's permission. I I can also highly recommend the Library of Congress, loc.gov, which is a great source of images. They have a really good search function, and almost everything there is in the public domain.
Thanks.
So hope that answers your question.
Yeah. I have a tough question, a really tough question for you, Penny. How do you know when to stop researching and to start writing?
This is probably the thing that people struggle with the most. And truthfully, there's going to be some crossover. You can't completely shut off the research. You're not hardwired that way if you're a genealogist. But if you're interested in writing, you really have to go back to that step number one and shift mental gears. Just step back, look at things in a different way. Think about what your focus is going to be for writing and start thinking about it as a writing project. Now, if you wait until you have all your research done, you're never going to get it written because you're never going to finish your research. I don't know of any piece we've ever published that has every loose end tied up in any way. In fact, I was just interestingly looking at a book last week that I had always thought was completely about the author's family, and it turned out 400 pages of it were not, because he had never been able to tie his family into this family and thought he would be able to. So you've just got to take that leap and stop for now. When you're rereading your manuscript, you'll see where the gaps are. You may see them when you're writing. I was just looking at a draft the other day started by a colleague who's our editor-in-chief, and it was full of blank lines where he knew he didn't have the information. Born at this place on blank, because he didn't have the date. He knew the place but not the date, or he knew the date but not the place. Peppered with blanks where he knew the information needed to be filled in, but by getting it down, it helped him see what was missing. And so you may see it as you're writing, you may see it as you're doing your self-editing. So there's always going to be lots of crossover. So I don't have a real clear answer except that it's something that everybody struggles with. Just start writing.
Great. Let's just have one last question. Brenda asks, what is the best program to purchase that allows you to combine text, documents, and photos?
That's a great question, and it's something we're asked all the time and something we think about all the time. We use Microsoft Word for writing, and plenty of people use that all the way through publication. They take it all the way to the PDF. Microsoft Word offers great functionalities for writing. For instance, all those numbers in a register style format, it will automatically do for you. You have to set it up to do it, but it's a great way to keep track of those. And if you add a person or delete a person, it will automatically update, which is a great function. It will also allow you to add tags that will ultimately generate an index, which is also a great feature. However, Microsoft Word is really kind of fussy when it comes to images, and they want to jump all around the page. You can get them to stop doing it, but it takes some work. What we usually do is take things all the way up through an edited manuscript until we get it about as far along as we can, and then we bring it into a program called Adobe InDesign. It's a great program. It does a lot of things like many Adobe products do. However, it's very expensive to buy the full program. It's about $1,000. But they've now started offering, I just looked this up yesterday in case someone asked, they've now started offering something called, what is it, the Creative Cloud. Is that what it is, Ginevra? First of all, you can do a free 30-day trial, and then you can, for $75 a month, you can use that program. If you sign up for a whole year, it's $50 a month, which is still pretty expensive, but it makes it affordable to use it for a short time. Now, if you work with someone like a designer or if you work with a publisher, they will have a program like that and can take your Word file or whatever you're working with and pour it into InDesign. I've played around a little bit with Microsoft Publisher, and even though it's very good to use with images and text, and it's designed for publications, for some crazy reason it does not support footnotes. So I was able to import a Microsoft Word document. None of the footnote numbers appeared. None of the footnotes appeared. I don't understand that at all. So I was feeling pretty bullish about it till I discovered that. There are other programs, but Adobe InDesign is the publisher's choice right now. It's really what all publishers and printers seem to be using. So I hope that helps.
Thanks, Penny. So there were a few questions that we weren't able to address in this presentation, but if you would like to write to Penny with your question, you can contact her at publications@nehgs.org. Also, if you have any specific questions about your research or maybe a specific question about your writing project, you might want to consider scheduling a consultation with either Penny or another member of our writing and publishing team, or you might even consider hiring our research services department as well. If you're interested in learning more about those services, you can write to the email addresses on the current screen, and I will also include those in the follow-up email that you'll receive tomorrow. Finally, thank you again for joining us today. As you leave the event, you'll have the opportunity to fill out a survey and give us your feedback. As we continue to grow our webinars and online offerings, all feedback is extremely helpful, so I thank you in advance. If you'd like to access more how-to resources or learn about upcoming online educational programs, please visit our online learning center, americanancestors.org/learning-center. I hope to see you at our webinars and online courses in the future. Goodbye for now.